All right. Angela is on the show. You're over in London. I'm in San Diego. Welcome to the Low Carb Athlete Podcast.
Thank you, Debbie. I'm really excited to be back. It's really nice to be here today.
Well, it's good to see you. We always have our Ben Greenfield coaching calls that we have once a month, and we're just short and we never get to interact. So it's nice to talk to you. And I hope we'll be in London this September. So I have to let you know when we're coming over there. Finally, after 3 canceled Europe trip, last 3 years, it's like, all right, let's finally get to go to Europe and have our life travel again. So today I really wanted you to come on the show because you've talked a lot about personalized nutrition, as we both do, and Nutrigenomics, and really getting into metabolic flexibility and how important it is to get this information out there, dialing it in for the athlete, those that are actually exercising, being fit and healthy from the inside out. I'm always trying to show different ways how we really have this personalized approach we want to take to figure out the best way for a fueling, training, and performing plan for an athlete, because a lot of the information out there is for people with metabolic illness and not really for the fit person on the outside. Most people that are fit are not healthy on the inside. So that's my goal, to get people fit and healthy from the inside out. So I would love to hear kind of what is Nutrigenomics from you. I did the intro with your information, but also a little bit of bio of just looking up what does Google say. So what do you say of what Nutrigenomic is?
It's really like a specialist area of enabling you. It's the science behind using nutrition to influence your epigenetic expression. And obviously, it's one of the greatest things we have control over is over what we eat. And so we can influence this in a positive way or a negative way. And I think that when people start to understand that food is essentially chemical information for our cells, and it's telling our bodies what to do with that information, we can start to really have a different attitude to food. And I think to nourish ourselves like a high performing athlete would do, I think so many of us kind of are always trying to do it just on a very short-term results driven basis, rather than looking ahead. And I think if you look ahead to some of the sort of greatest athletes that are really achieving the best results, they are incredibly healthy. And one of the things that they do is that they factor in recovery cycles. And I guess that's probably the biggest thing that I see people falling short of, particularly with recreational athletes, because they're often type A personalities, overachievers, and which I love. I'm all like, I'm a type A myself. But what can happen is you're not just kind of overachieving in the athletic sphere as well, but you're also doing that with work. You're trying to be super mom at the same time, and it can all just be too much. And I think that when people get into biohacking as well, you can just feel like, oh my God, well, I should be doing that and I should be doing this. And then I've got to layer this in, and it can just get quite overwhelming. And then what I see is usually is people come to me where they just had a Dutch test. And this is where their results show me on paper that they're definitely doing too much, and there's no denying it. And that's a great opportunity if we can catch it early, that they can actually dial things back a little bit and they'll see enhanced results. But unfortunately, as you know, Debbie, they can come to you a little bit late where you're sort of verging on that burnout stage. And that's a much bigger thing to sort of turn around.
Yeah. And that's what we're both, I think, on the same page, is trying to help people prevent where we got to. That you don't want to keep pushing through it and avoiding those red flags for so many months or years that you are in that exhaustive phase, not in just like I talked to someone this morning that they said, oh, they fixed it in 4 months. I'm like, oh, it took me 8 years. So it's really how to catch those early red flags now to when you need to course correct and listen to your body. But I think that's what I'm seeing, a pattern of people, I was saying in the intro, doing too much of everything, because we are that driven, ambitious, high performing, high charging individual that you say, oh, biohack, cold therapy. All right. Biohacking suggestions that we need to do the sauna, and we need to do breath holding work and walking and all this. So then you get to be so inundated with biohacks that I think everything is just always too much. And I would say the Goldilocks effect, everything, to find out not too much, not too little, what's that right amount, create that positive response in your individual body and self to thrive and feel alive and improve the aging process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you can kind of live younger at the same time, right, and reverse your biological age, so much the better. But actually, what a lot of people are doing is they're kind of hammering themselves a little bit, and they're not actually really getting any younger. They're sort of accelerating that aging process. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more, Debbie. I think if you can understand the mechanisms and how they work and what the research shows, then you can actually apply the appropriate dose. And it's quite interesting with things like cold therapy, for example, that if you look at both the metabolic effects and the resilience enhancing effects. So if you think, why would you do this? There's a couple of reasons, right, in terms of cold exposure. One is it can help to reduce inflammation, enhance recovery. You can also use it because it's going to help boost your metabolism. If you're exposed to cold and you start to shiver, that's going to help you sort of beige off some of that white fat, turn it into more brown fat. That has more mitochondria. You can utilize that for energy. That's a really positive metabolism boosting benefit. And then there's the sort of mental resilience side, right? So every time you turn that shower to cold or you get in a cold bath, you've really got to overcome yourself to be able to do it. And so it's really good for resilience training, and it releases epinephrine, norepinephrine, and dopamine. So it's really, really enhancing in terms of getting you buzzing in that mood. And so obviously is going to appeal to people like you and I who are type A personalities and think, yeah, I've really got to do this. And you've overcome a challenge. And there are benefits definitely from all of those things. And one of the cool things is that is very much a form of what we call eustress, by eustress, stress, because it doesn't seem to raise cortisol at the same time. So that's great. So you might think, well, then I should be going and doing more cold exposure, but less isn't more. And I think it's just understanding that with most of these things, there is a bell curve. And with something like cold exposure, for example, it seems that around 11 minutes a week is about optimal. So actually, that's not that much of your time. And you can split that to anywhere between 2 to 4 sessions. And what I would say to people is it's better off actually looking and thinking, well, how can I optimize this and do the most time efficient dose possible in the right way, right? So for example, the cold exposure has been shown to be really, really positive for enhancing recovery on any kind of exercise, apart from maybe hypertrophy and strength training. So actually, if you're going to go and do a really strong hypertrophy session, you wouldn't, and you really, really care about the benefits, then maybe, because it's sort of open to doubt whether it would influence that in a negative way, you wouldn't then follow that with a cold exposure session. But you could do the cold exposure on the days that you're not engaging in that. So you've maybe gone for like a nice fasted walk or a hike, you're going to come back and have a cold shower. Or for example, you've done some high intensity work. But again, it's like high intensity work. What I see people doing is they love that endorphin release and they want to do it. So now it's like, right, well, I'm not just going to go and do one class at the gym. That's not enough anymore. I'll do a 10K run and then I'll do a HIIT class, or I'll do 2 HIIT classes. And actually, again, like the poison is in the dose. Let's not forget that. So is the benefit. I think it's just like sometimes dialing it back, you're going to see better results.
Yeah. Again, less is more.
Yeah.
I know some people doing the, the cold tubs, like the Myzork, how do you say it? The big cold tubs, and they're doing it every day. I'm like, is that really effective to do it every day? And they're doing it for, 10 minutes. And I started thinking of this last year when I started to see, these patterns of people just, you take something and take it to the extreme, like OMAD and this fasting and doing it so much that it's like, all right, it used to be beneficial, but now you're taking it to the extreme. So we always have to find that right amount again, that Goldilocks effect, find out, okay, how much fasting should I do? How many times a month should I do OMAD? How much should I do a fasted workout? And when should I break my fast? And, when do I place the cold therapy and the sauna and all those different hacks that we always talk about? But it's just, finding the ideal day and the ideal week and the ideal monthly schedule for an individual, I think is really fun to map it all out, especially with the cycling female, and really look at, okay, when is the best time for you because you're unique, and figure it out.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that's something actually interesting you touch on there is what I talk about in my programs is building a foundational schedule. And I think if you can build a foundational schedule, you can start to put the things that are important to you in place first, and then everything else sort of fits around it. But it allows you to have that really good helicopter view and think of the week and think, okay, well, how many days am I going to do cold exposure? If I know, for example, that 11 minutes is around about right, then how am I going to split those sessions, and on what days that going to work, and how will I fit that in around my workouts? What days am I going to do a longer fast? Where am I, as you say, in my monthly cycle? I mean, it's quite interesting that I think people always want to do more, as you say, but it's not about just layering on, layering on, layering on. With fasting, what I see commonly is people are like, they'll buy a device, for example. So they'll buy a continuous blood glucose monitor and then feel quite frustrated that their blood glucose isn't that well controlled. Or they'll buy a device like the Lumen device. And Lumen will basically, it looks at your respiratory exchange ratio, and it will tell you whether you're in more of a fat burning mode or a carb burning mode or both. And they'll score you between 1 and 5. So 1 is you're burning mostly like all fats, to 2 mostly fats. In the middle, you've got a bit of both, and then the other end of the spectrum with the 4 and 5. And I see people come to me and they're like, I'm so frustrated. I've got a Lumen. I'm doing all of these things, and now my scores are like a constant 4. Why am I seeing that? Because you're overstressing the body. So the body has a mechanism and will release glucose into the blood. And so you're going to be a carb burner because you're so stressed out, right? You're so kind of on it all the time. And I just think, I talk about it in my book, Rethink Health. There's a whole chapter that's just purely dedicated to recovery protocols, because I think it is one of the most important things. And it's something that I am a recovering like type A and perfectionist. I really had to learn.
Yeah.
And I still have to work hard at it. My husband still tells me off and he's like, Angela, just like, go, 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 go. You've got to stop. And I think it can be hard to do that, but actually it gives you an opportunity to really come back and be more in touch with yourself. And I've actually found it really nice over the years to develop a spiritual practice, because somehow that's just been very rewarding for me and has given me something to do that really does offset that tendency to overdo things.
Yeah. No, that's what I feel like, I want to focus on that when I'm speaking on the low carb cruise in May, and in KetoCon, I'm speaking in July, that everyone's talking about keto and all this information, insulin resistance and nutrition. But it's like, what about, people like me, that I was doing all the right things, quote unquote, and I still got insulin resistant signs and symptoms and dysbiosis and the whole metabolic chaos that I had happen. I was doing fasted workouts. I was doing, yoga and strength training and HIIT training and endurance training. But, I was doing all the right things too much, and that caused breakdown and burnout. So I'm trying to, explain the same concepts to people, that stress is on and you're overfilling that beaker of stress. So you can do all the keto, all the fasting, but is it going to cause more damage than good? And what, the right amount we're talking about. And so how do you know what is the right amount for you when you're working with people, figuring out their nutrition and creating that foundation? How do people get started in figuring out what to eat? And then we always talk about, I would say what you eat, how you eat, when, and why. So how do you help people dial that in and make it that personalized nutrition program?
So I look at a few things, as you know, like often, and I think we both from working with Ben as well, there's no one size fits all in terms of nutrition. You're right. It has to be very personal. I think the Mediterranean diet is the one that across the world works the most for the most number of people. And actually most of what I will adapt for people based around their things like their genetics or their gut health will be some version around that, because it has so many attributes in it, designed to keep us healthy. And so I think that when you're looking at nutrition, if you are able to test, this is going to be so much more to your advantage. But if you're not, then adopting something like a Mediterranean style diet will suit most people really well, because the fats in it are very healthy. We're obviously not talking here, Debbie, about the food that people like to enjoy when they think of Italian food and they just think pizza, pasta, hooray. That's not what we're talking about. But if you're thinking about things like oily fish and nuts and seeds and herbs and salad and rocket, I think you guys call it arugula, is it? I'm always getting used to the names. Arugula. Okay. It's like coriander is cilantro, and spring onions are scallions, I believe. So I'm always like correcting my language when I'm speaking to the US. But so I think the more that you can incorporate that and whole foods, beyond that, obviously, like people have different. The way that they process sugars in particular is very different, right? It's very individual. And that will come down in part to genetics, in part to age, in part down to your hormonal health, where you are in your menstrual cycle, what your insulin sensitivity looks like, and just how much muscle mass you have, because really that is what's going to improve things like insulin sensitivity. And so some people will have flexibility to eat more carbohydrates, depending on their training load. Some people who are training really, really hard, athletes in particular, are going to be needing more protein to support those demands than the average person. So I think that I factor in those things. And then often I will look at a full suite of panels, the same as you. So you'll look at genetics, you'll look at their gut, you look at something like the Dutch test for their hormones, any kind of blood work they have in terms of triglycerides and cholesterol, and then formulate that plan appropriately for them. But the main thing is that they should be, I think for anyone listening to this, what happens is your body becomes very well adapted to anything you're doing. So when we were talking about the cold exposure there, people can go in and they can spend 5-10 minutes in a cold bath every day. The thing with that is you've become adapted to it. And so your body isn't necessarily getting the same stimulus from it anyway. I love the way Andrew Huberman talks about it, because he talks about climbing walls. And I think if people can see it in this way, and he has a whole podcast on it, it's much better to think of it in those terms. So what wall do you have to climb? Well, first of all, getting in, usually there is a wall, unless you now love it, that you've got to climb. And then if you're staying in a bit longer, there's a wall to climb. If you've got to turn the temperature down, for example, if you're in something like a shower, that's another wall to climb. But ultimately, whether it's your exercise, whether it's your fasting, whether it's your cold exposure, you want to be challenging the body in different ways to create a response, but in what we call a controlled dose, so that you are recovering, but you're stimulating enough. And I think one of the common mistakes is that sort of perpetual pushing, but almost never pushing hard enough and never recovering enough.
Yeah.
And I think that's where you can get frustrated. And that shows up commonly in carrying about another 10 pounds that you shouldn't be. Belly fat always tells me that someone is either not managing their blood sugar or their stress, or both. And if you're not managing your stress, you're not managing your blood sugar. And maybe you're having poor sleep. And I think those would be the first signs when you start to look. And yes, obviously thyroid has an impact, but often it's because we're just putting too much stimulus in here. So start looking for the signs, because your body will start talking to you, and you can ignore it at your peril, because that voice is just going to get louder and louder until at some point you're going to have to take note, and it will just force you, as you and I have both had direct experience of ourselves.
Yeah. It's funny because I say the same thing. It's like, I was doing Ironmans, for so many years. And I would say the story that I wasn't getting more fit. I was so used to doing Ironmans from 2001 to 2012, 2013. I stopped being able to race, but because I was forced out because my adrenal stuff, but I always say, like, I got so used to going for a 5-hour bike ride. I didn't lose weight from it. It wasn't, the best way to really lose weight. People think exercise more, eat less, but actually my body adapted to that extra exercise, that endurance work. So it really didn't change anything, but added more stress. So I want to ask about, what do you look at genetic wise? Do you have certain markers, or do you use a program like my DNA Fit we've talked about before, other programs? What do you like to look at?
Yeah, I like the DNA Fit actually merged with Pronetics, and they have a new test that they use called Circle, which is probably, a much more advanced one, where they do test 31 million data points. So it's full exome sequencing. So
what's it called now?
It's
Circle?
Circle. They have DNA Fit as well, but they have one that tests many more points. So you can look at things like cancer risk, for example, interaction with with medications, how your genes interact. You can look at family genetic diseases that can be passed to you, that you can pass on. It's a really in-depth test, but it's presented in really usable data. I think in a usable format. I think a lot of those tests are really difficult because people get this raw data and they're like, well, what the hell do I do with that? And then it doesn't really matter if we give it to someone like me. We're still going to have to sit there and then try and interpret it and spend time. And I think if you've got a company that can really take that data and put it in a meaningful representation, so that you've got actionable things and you can look back at that report yourself, even without the help of someone like you or me, to be able to go, right, okay, I know that my detoxification pathways at baseline genetics level are impaired, right? I have deletions in certain SNPs like GSTT1. Doesn't really matter what they're called. Those deletions are there. I need to support those pathways. That's a flag to me that for me to be optimally healthy when we are in an environment now with such great toxic exposure, I know that simply, and this is the thing I teach in my Live Younger Blueprint program, is you need to include more cruciferous vegetables into your diet. So more things like broccoli, cauliflower, bok choy, kale. You need to have more sulfur containing compounds to support that liver detoxification. So, things like the allium family, leeks, garlic, scallions, as you call them, things like that, really, really important. Okay. And so I think what people need to do is, again, let's just make it really, really simple. If you have this, how can you positively influence the expression of those genes and give yourself what you need? And nature is very good at doing that for us. She gives us all of the compounds that we need to support our health. You may be lucky and have longevity enhancing genes that those function more optimally. But if you don't, does it matter? Because actually, in reality, we can all include more sirtuin enhancing compounds in our diet, right? Or stacks, as they're called. So these are things like curcumin, raw cacao, resveratrol from red wine, all these, cetin from strawberries, all these delicious tasting foods that are really, really healthy. They're enjoyable, that you can add in to smoothies and shakes. You can, sprinkle broccoli sprouts on your salads, and really just to help to optimize your longevity and your detoxification pathways and your metabolic rate. And I just think we just want to break it down, make it simple, make it practical, and make it doable for people, because that's really the whole idea. Everyone loves data, and it's amazing to look at a set of labs and go, oh, I didn't know that about me, and that about me, and that about me. It's like, yeah, but if you're not going to do anything with it, it doesn't really mean anything. That's kind of how I approach it.
Yeah, I think the labs can be confusing for people. That's why you need someone to interpret all the results and look at the whole picture, not just one lab. That's why we always do multiple labs, and you have to invest in your health, but it really can give you more specific plan of what's going on when we identify what's going on under the hood. But I think genetics is such a good, something to add to that investigation, to really look at what we should look out for. Is not, the epigenetics is that lifestyle you're having as well. So we want to look at the whole picture. But I think there are confusing reports out there, like Strategene is popular and it's very effective, but for someone that's got a little more training in that area, because people get those reports back, they're like, what the heck? It's like going to, you have to be a chemist to read all the data that you get on your methylation cycle. So I was like, simple, well-presented DNA fit type of apps that they have, and you can kind of get that information for the client to look at their nutrition, their exercise. But yeah, the stress and the sleep and the caffeine and all that information is good, more additional clues to put into their protocol. So best ways to eat, are you finding, looking at the genetics, that not everyone can be, because keto is such a, popular thing, and carnivore, are you finding kind of switching up for people, or that doing so low carb isn't necessary, and some people can't do saturated fats as much? Do you look at that part of it, or just kind of start everyone Mediterranean, then tweak it?
No, I do look at that. So for example, if people are sensitive to things like saturated fats, then it's really important that they don't actually have as many in their diet. However, what I would say is the metabolic benefits, when people start to optimize with their genetics, kind of speak for themselves. When I find that some people will come to my programs, for example, and they'll think, well, actually, I'm okay. I'm pretty fit. I don't have a lot of weight to lose. I think I'm doing okay. And they've been going on a more ketogenic style diet. And then they get their DNA results, and actually they find out they're highly fat sensitive. So they change those ratios and just tweak them a bit, because we need fats in our diet. I'm not asking people to go really low fat, but they lessen that off a bit. And actually they're like, oh my God, I had absolutely no idea that now I'm like 5-10 pounds leaner. And I feel better. I look better. I've got more energy, just because of the way their body was processing these things. So I think it works really well as a baseline. But then, as you say, I think looking at things like gut testing, Dutch testing, organic acids certainly in someone who's got very, very low energy is really important, because when we're looking at those tests, they're telling us what's going on in the here and now. I think With the microbiome, it's a little bit more complicated. I do use like the test by Genova, but I think we're learning so much that I think in another 5 or 10 years' time, we're going to know so much more about the microbiome, because probably we don't even know all the different types of bacteria and things yet. So we're just testing for a small amount. But definitely, if somebody has issues, for example, and you need to identify pathogenic bacteria or something like a parasite that needs fixing, then it's super, super helpful. In terms of its ability to help you optimize your microbiome and your general, what we call commensal bacteria, I think actually people can do that without testing. If they can be incorporating things like probiotic rich yogurt, or if they're dairy intolerant, can't have those sorts of things in kefir, coconut yogurt that's got live cultures in it is a really, really good start. Incorporating a bit of that on an empty stomach every day, taking probiotics can be helpful. And then eating these fibrous foods that we're talking about, and things like green bananas that are going to give you effectively the food that those bacteria need to nourish them. And they feed off polyphenols. So the more bright and colorful fruit and vegetables you incorporate into your diet, your gut bacteria are going to be really happy and more optimized. Making sure that you have got good gut lining, that you're not overdoing processed foods and tons of gluten, for example, that's going to disrupt that and lead to more things like leaky gut. I think if you're doing all of those things, and it's exciting, I think, what's happening with the gut. I was reading the recent research study done by Dr. Cara Fitzgerald around the Lactobacillus plantarum, and how that actually has been shown to naturally allow our microbiome to produce more higher levels of folate in the body. So even without taking B vitamins, folate went up in these individuals that were in the study by them taking Lactobacillus plantarum. And that's contained in, you and I both love Bioptimizers products. That's in P3OM by Bioptimizers. Great probiotic. And I just think it's exciting times. We're learning more and more how we can get our bodies to just be more efficient and function optimally, but actually it's there in nature all the time, right? So the more whole foods we can incorporate, the better.
Yeah, I always say that too, because I always am curious, and I've heard we only absorb about 20% of the supplements. So taking 10, 20 different supplements each day. It's like, all right, am I really getting this to break down my body? Ideally, we want to get most from real food, or get an IV or an injection or, some other way to get those nutrients in. But I think, working on proper digestion and make sure we're able to break down that food we're eating and absorb it is so key part of our, gut healing protocol, and working on north to south, because I think so many people have broken digestion processes.
Yeah, I agree. I think they do. And having good elimination is really important. It's not, your doctor might say, oh yeah, it's really normal. There's just some people that only go to the toilet every 3 or 4 days. And it's like, well, yeah, but you're probably not detoxifying very well if that's what you're doing. What's common isn't necessarily normal or healthy, right? That's the thing. I think that's what, understanding that difference.
Yeah, what normal is versus optimal. And that most people come to me, they're not having regular bowel movements, or they're more constipated than having too many bowels. That's for sure. That, we were working on a detox protocol. It's different clients I have right now. And they, I've learned, always open up the drainage pathways first and kind of prep the liver before you do any type of program, even switching to be more higher fat, low carb food plan, because you need to be able to detox. And I think so many people have congested liver and they are not having effective drainage pathways, as, pooping everything regularly out. So just those toxins recirculate in your body. But I find that more and more common with people, and they don't think there's anything wrong with that. You have to really red flag if you're not pooping regularly, people. You got to talk about your poop.
We do. It's very true. And I think people have grown to fear carbohydrates. I think that's the sad thing. Whereas actually carbohydrates contain so much fiber, so many vitamins and minerals. It's so important to be incorporating them. So I'm a big advocate of going more plant-based with healthy amounts of protein and fats. I just think for me, that's the ideal combination, I think. And I'm not, there are people who are on vegan and vegetarian diets. I think that can be really healthy for a short time. I think over time, you can miss out on some essential nutrients that you probably need to pick up through supplementation. But it's not always obvious in the beginning, but I understand why people would want to do that and respect that decision. But just be aware that you may need to do some supplementation.
Yeah. I know people always freak out when I have them take all this stuff. I'm like, you gotta start with this and then we'll break it down. But so how do you define metabolic flexibility and, getting there? Because I think we keep talking more and more about variation, not doing, as we said earlier, anything too much. So being too low carb, as you're saying. I've done a lot of shows on this with Rob Wolf talking about, strategic carb timing, and Peter Dafty. We've talked about this as well, that people have gone to villainizing carbs and doing too much fat and not enough protein, and doing, not, you feel guilty if you have a carbohydrate now. And so it's just like, all right, carbs are not all evil. It's what we eat, but also when we're timing them, but also, mixing things up. So if you are metabolically flexible, whatever that means, you can explain that to us in your words. And then, how do we switch things up so we can have the fat fuel tank and the carb fuel tank? So, with your definition, metabolic flexibility, you've done some courses on this. So you did a recent workshop. So how do you explain to people what is metabolic flexibility and why should we have it?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And I think, as you say, people have been focusing on how do I get fat adapted and kind of fear the carbs. And that's all they're sort of focusing on. Whereas metabolic flexibility, really, I think is kind of king, if you like, because that is really your body's ability to burn fats and carbs on demand. And if you look at children, when we're born, we're pretty metabolically flexible. So you can see a young child playing, they get completely absorbed in what they're doing. They are burning fat. Now, if you leave them too long, there's going to be a meltdown eventually, but they can be so focused on what they're doing that they don't notice. They're not like some adults, for example, who I think, feel they've got to eat every couple of hours and they can't focus and they're on this sugar roller coaster. But I think because of that and people's awareness around that and things like insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes, we've all kind of transitioned a little bit too much the other way, where we're thinking, well, I must just be fat adapted all the time, constantly. And that can lead in some people to a down regulation in things like thyroid function. It can lead to an elevation in stress hormones, where actually, as you say, you can still develop insulin resistance. You can still end up with poor blood sugar control because your body's now under high stress. So really what you want to do in terms of metabolic flexibility is teach your body to be able to burn fats and burn carbs effectively. And when I say burn carbs effectively, what I mean by that is be able to use them to fuel your training sessions so that you can actually work out and perform as well as you want to, but then be able to transition back into burning fat in between. So when someone isn't well adapted, what's going to happen is they're going to eat carbs, the blood sugar goes up, insulin spikes to take the glucose out, which is very natural and needs to happen. But then you get a crash. So now they're sort of craving more. And you'll see that because people will say, well, I can't eat carbs because as soon as I eat carbs, now I'm just craving carbs all day. And there is an element of that, right? You will crave what you eat. So I'm not suggesting that you start your day with croissants and orange juice, okay? That's not what I'm suggesting. However, incorporating healthy whole food choices of your carbohydrates gives you that fiber, gives you all those important vitamins and minerals that we get from those plants, and can help to improve satiety, but also help your body communicate a sense of calm, help with things like serotonin production. It's going to help you to sleep better, help you feel more relaxed, particularly for women, and not do necessarily really elongated fasts and then strictly ketogenic diet, where I've seen women actually go into menopause early. And I know it's early because what happens is when they stop it and they bring carbs back in, their cycle returns. And I think it's about understanding, like, your menstrual cycle is so important. This is building bone deposits, brain deposits, metabolic health deposits for your future. So the more ovulatory events you can have pre-menopause, the better, and you want to optimize that. So I think that really achieving metabolic flexibility is king. And so if you are on a more ketogenic style diet, I tend not to eat lots of carbs during the day because I feel like my mental function and concentration is better. But then cycle out of it in the evening, have some carbs, enjoy it, you're going to sleep better. But then say, for example, you feel like, well, maybe you've indulged a bit, right? You've had some friends over for dinner, you've had a couple of glasses of wine, maybe you've had dessert, and now you feel like you're in a really glycogen replete state. Often what will happen is you'll wake up hungry in the morning, whereas normally you wake up and you're fine without any food. You wake up hungry because you have turned into a little bit more of a sugar burner. But that's fine. All you need to do now is to basically enhance. This would be a good opportunity for you to remain fasted for a little bit, for you to do some form of workout that depletes that muscle glycogen so that you can then refuel. But if you're metabolically flexible, what will happen is if we were to measure it, your blood sugar would be well controlled after eating. And we would see that if you use something like a Lumen device, you transition back into fat burning mode pretty effectively after eating those carbohydrates. So that's really where I want people to be, because I think it's healthier. You'll see your hair's better, your skin glows, and you feel better. And commonly what women will then say is, wow, I can really like crush that workout now. You know, I feel like I can really bring that energy. And I think that's the key thing, is it's all about getting that balance right. I hate that word balance, but it's really true.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, those are great tips. And I think it's teaching people when it is appropriate to fast. As you said, after you had like a higher carb meal or you overindulge, and you can kind of switch back into fat burning by getting a kind of a jump start or biohack your metabolism by doing a little bit of fast, that you're getting yourself to produce ketones. But what are your kind of guidelines and thoughts on fasting, and fasting for athletes, fasting for women, if people want fat loss, performance, or longevity? I think the purpose is different, but what are your experiences with fasting?
So my experience has been is very individual, actually, and I think it's very individual in terms of women's menstrual cycle as well. So some women, they feel very differently, and I would encourage all women that are still in their menstruating years to track their cycle and to understand what's going on, because actually we've been gifted with this infradian rhythm, and every single month when you have your period, it's an opportunity to look and see what kind of health you're in. So if you've got a really regular cycle, you've got no real PMS, you haven't got heavy bleeding, your period is red in color, it's not super clotty, it doesn't last a long time, you've probably got fairly decent hormonal balance. You're not getting masses of breakouts and things. But that isn't the case for many women. Many women are really bloated or have really bad PMS that I see, or they've only got 2 good weeks a month, or they are really struggling with heavy bleeding, or they feel like, particularly in perimenopause, they're bleeding all the time. And so if this basically tells us that there's a degree of sex hormone imbalance. So if you're then fasting for elongated periods of time, this is going to disrupt this further. And sometimes then it's about really just supporting that HPA access, as you know, Debbie, and actually having more carbohydrates, having more recovery is a really big part of that. Maybe doing more zone 2 training, for example. So, looking at your menstrual cycle and thinking, well, I know that once I've ovulated, at the end of the month, I want to be optimizing progesterone production. That probably isn't a good time to be doing really elongated fasts and high intensity interval training, or even super maximal training, or what some people will do is all 3 of those things at the end of the month. It's probably not an ideal thing. But the natural thing that women think is, I mustn't push myself on my period. But that's a misconception. If you don't feel good in your period, then fine, don't push yourself, right? You want to build that blood back up because you are losing things like iron, for example. However, if you feel good, you are most like a man at this time. You are most like a man. So why would you not go out and crush your workout if you're feeling good? I think Paula Radcliffe, the British runner, actually broke an Olympic record on the first or second day of her period, right? You can push yourself at this time. It's actually the bit in the lead up to your period, from sort of day 21, 24, that this is a really sensitive time, 21 really. And so it's about understanding your menstrual cycle and how to optimize around it. And then putting in foods that actually support you in that menstrual stage. I break it down into 3 stages really, because you've got the follicular, which includes your menstrual, and then the follicle ripening. So that's kind of that first 10-day period. And then you've got the ovulatory period in the middle, and then you've got the luteal phase. Now you could break those down into menstrual, follicular, but that's actually part of the same. You could break down the luteal into the phase 1, phase 2. But if you think of it in 3 bulks, actually it's sort of easier, because really what you're going to do is fade in and out of stages with each one, right? So as you come in and you're menstruating, the first day you might feel a bit off, but now you're starting to build up, the energy's building up as you get to ovulation, and then you're not going to suddenly go, oh my God, I've ovulated, stop everything, that's it now, I'm just going to sit back, do yoga, meditate, lie on a beach somewhere. You're actually going to try and, you wouldn't get results, would you? You've got to continue your training, but you just want to slowly be lessening off during that process. People can go to my website, actually, angelafosterperformance.com/hormones, and you can download a free hormone guide where I talk about this and energy and creativity as well, and how to optimize things like your creativity and productivity around it, and different foods and the smoothie recipes. But essentially, I would say with fasting, just understand that you, as Dr. Stacey Sims says, you are not a small man. And therefore, what works for your partner doesn't necessarily work for you. And I think, if he's doing a 16, 18-hour fast and his mental cognition's through the roof and he feels amazing, but you, on the other hand, are doing an 18-hour fast and a HIIT workout and you're just like, on your nerves and so highly stressed, it's probably indicative that your body is under too much strain. So I would just say, come with this with an air of curiosity and journal on what works. The life cycle of an egg is around 100 days. So anything you're doing is going to take a few months for you to really see those changes. So the results that you have now are from what you've been doing for the last 3 months or so. So let's look ahead and see, well, if you tweak things and change them, what kind of results can you get in 3 months' time? You can also eat more carbs at the end of the month, right? So this should be playtime. You can relax, you can focus more on recovery protocols, and you can eat more carbs because you've got better insulin sensitivity and more, you've got the ability to burn more calories, right? So actually this is a fun time, enjoy it. And I think if we can embrace it a little bit more, so much the better.
Yeah, I actually yesterday was working on mapping it all out for the female for their exercise schedule each month, nutrition and fasting window, and try to write that into an article, because it's so fun, actually, I think, to really look at your whole 28-day cycle, 30 days, and look at, all right, let's use Training Peaks to schedule their workouts and then change their nutrition. And like Dr. Anna Quebec has this lovely new book called Menu Pause that doesn't matter if you're male or female or going through menopause, that it's really great way to look at when to put pause on a nutrition program and switch it up. And so it's a great book to get to look at, all right, I'm doing this program on this, first week of my cycle, I can do more keto. And then the last week of my cycle, I can do more of a carb refeed week, and then match that with my exercise. That's my kind of restorative recovery deload week, and really find the best days to do, really hit the weights heavier and do more HIIT training those days. And so it's really fun, something I was trying to work on. But a couple other things.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's brilliant.
Well, it's fun for athletes. I think, for females and males, it's the same thing. You can be specific, but women, you can be so specific on what to do when and why and how long and everything. So it's cool. But again, like Dr. Stacey Sims, she says, as you said, women are not small men. So it's totally different for them, but she's also against fasting and against low carb. So it's, everyone has their different opinions, but I think it's not about, your carb count's going to change all the time for real carbs, healthy carbs, not crappy carbs, and not, again, keto, not being crappy keto too. I think it's eat real food that's nutrient dense, and the macronutrient ratio is going to depend on you. And again, time of your cycle and your exercise load and stress, but it's really fun to look at, protein. Because I think I like Dr. Gabrielle Leon's information that she's getting out there, and a lot of others and Cynthia Thurlow, about women and athletes are not eating enough protein. And I think that, again, it's like we all, going to keto, to zero carbs and not focusing on protein and just eating all fat. And then, there was paleo, now it's carnivore, just eat meat. And that's why I like this variations that Dr. Anna Quebec talks about in her book, having these different weekly food plans that you're carnivore, you're carb, you're vegetarian. And then just having, getting enough protein in. But we've been talking a lot in our coaching group. I know I was trying to figure out, okay, if you're trying to get, say, 130 grams of protein a day, you got to really figure it out, because I think people are doing OMAD so much, or 2 meals a day, and they're doing this so restricted eating window. You can't do that if you're trying to get 20 to 40 grams of protein, 30 maybe grams of protein every 3 to 4 hours. But if you're only eating 1 meal a day, it's not going to happen. And if you're eating in a 5-hour window or 8-hour window, it's really hard too. So it's, how to figure that out for athletes, because I think people are fasting too much, eating incorrectly for their lifestyle.
I agree with you, and I think they resist it because they believe like the fat adaptation and the ketogenic diet is giving them those results and that concentration, but then also they're not necessarily sleeping that well, so there's indications it's not going too well for them, and they're feeling quite stressed. And I think you make a very good point there, Debbie, around the fact that they do need to be getting more protein. What I found is as soon as people start to eat more protein, they realize that, oh my God, actually my cognition is so much better. Because let's remember, protein gets broken down into amino acids, which are going to be the building blocks of those neurotransmitters. So it's actually going to really benefit you. And sometimes I'll find, even just essential amino acids mixed with a scoop of creatine is a wonderful nootropic in itself in terms of enhancing mental performance. So I think protein, I am a huge fan of Dr. Gabrielle Lyons, and I think and her work. And I think we shouldn't fear the protein. I think protein and carbs have always been a very big part of most athletes' nutrition. And I think we sometimes need to sort of go back to the roots on that. I think it's really, really important. I think the other thing I would say as well is, recognize you're an individual in every sense, right? We've talked about different fasting protocols, different cold exposure, different nutrition plans with things like genetics. We talked about the menstrual cycle. Also think about your circadian rhythm. Everybody is very, very different. So how are you going to optimize things in relation to that when you're building this foundational plan? Because the more specific you can be and the more regular you can be with your sleep and wake time, the better. But just because, again, like we were saying, one fasting protocol might work for one person, one type of diet might work for one person, isn't necessarily going to work for you if your friend or partner wakes up and crushes a workout at 5 a.m. because you might not be an early morning person. And what I found is people are then very prone to injury. So they think, well, I've got to do this and I've got to go out for this run before work. And this is how it has to happen. Again, typical type A personality. However, they end up injured all the time. And recognize that, there are things that happen. So for example, your body temperature is at its coolest roughly 2 hours before you wake up. And so when you're going to, if you recognize that, if you're an early morning person, then you probably can crush a workout. However, somebody who is naturally waking up about 4 or 5, working out at 6 a.m. is going to be fine because their body temperature is rising pretty nicely because their lowest body temperature was around 2 a.m. Whereas you're someone who maybe is naturally waking up without an alarm, if you don't use one, at 6, 7 o'clock. Well, your body temperature is maybe not dropping its lowest till 4 or 5. So if you then cold try and go and do that workout, you've got a high injury risk. And you'll know if this is you because you'll be that person who's like, why is it that I have to spend so long warming up and this other person's fine and they can just get going because they're warmer? And I think just be kind to yourself, right? Cut yourself some slack and begin to think, right, actually, how can I really optimize this? Maybe if I just forget the fact that it's a kind of alpha driven thing to do this at 5 a.m. Maybe I could just do this at a different time that's more suitable for me and my metabolism and my circadian rhythm and understand a bit about that and then start to optimize around that. You're going to see so much better results when you start putting these things together. But yeah, just really, really treat yourself like an individual.
Yeah, that's funny because I was just looking over that yesterday, the circadian rhythm clock, when is the best time to do everything every day. And says, work out 4 to 6 p.m. or 2 to 6 p.m. There's different ranges for your harder workout, higher intensity. But I am that person that has my lowest body temperature is at 2 a.m. and I wake up like around 4 or 5 a.m., sometimes, 6. But I went to the gym this morning and I usually go at night and I had my schedule different today. I was like, gosh, I can do squats. I can do such more intense exercise in the morning. When I go at 5:30 at night, I'm just like lying on the bench lifting heavy weights. There's no intensity in that workout at all. It's not the optimal time for me to do something hard at all.
Yeah, I am exactly the same as you. And the thing is, you go and you can have an incredible workout that then sets you up for the day, right? You've got all these endorphins, you feel amazing, you're so productive. But then by sort of this time, it's here 7 o'clock in the UK, you're kind of done, right? I'm tired.
Yeah.
If you said to me, do you want to go to the gym now? I'd be like, are you joking? Like,
yeah, bedtime.
Really, no part of me feels like it right now. Yeah. And I think that's the thing. The best time to do a workout is when you're actually going to do it, enjoy it, and get the most out of it. You're so right. And it's different for everyone. Whereas my husband, for example, even though he's quite an early morning person, he's not as early as me, he'll get injured if he goes early. Whereas I can work out fasted, crush it, even without caffeine. I'm so wide awake. I like to use it for the, ergogenic effects, but I don't need it. I can go and work out regardless, and then come back and, refuel. And I think really the best thing you can do is become your own biohacker, really, and find the optimal time for yourself.
Yeah, perfect. And we didn't get to all these other things about, you mentioned your how to live younger, longer, and you have the S.H.I.F.T methodology program and you have a women's program. So give us a little rundown of what you've got going on over on your website and your upcoming programs.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to do that. Thank you. So I run kind of my flagship program is something called the Live Younger Blueprint, or Live Younger Longer Blueprint. And that's basically all based around genetics. It's a 12-week program that I run. So for anyone that's interested in genetics, I have a masterclass on my website. You can go and watch on that. That is available. But what I do periodically is a few times a year. So if you're on my email list, you sign up to my newsletter, you'll hear about when I run a live version of it. And that's where my team and I come together. We personalize all your programs around your training, around your genetics, your nutrition. You get loads of live coaching from us, but that happens a few times a year. So if you're on my email list, you'll hear about that. I also have a new biohacking membership that's launching called the Female Biohacker Collective, which I am beyond excited about. So if people are interested in that at the moment, it's a case of just expressing your interest, because we're going to open it to a closed small group of people to begin with. So you just go to bit.ly/female-biohacker, and you can find everything there. My S.H.I.F.T protocol, if you want to kind of get an idea of where you are on sleep, hormones, insights, fueling your body training, which is the whole S.H.I.F.T program I do, I have a free health check you can do, and you get a personalized report. So you just go to yourtotalhealthcheck.com, and you can get a free report there, and it will score you in every category and give you personalized recommendations on how you can improve. And then other than that, it's just kind of find me on Instagram, in my Facebook group, Female Biohacker. I love connecting with people. This is like my life. This is what I do. I just love it, and helping people get healthier. I think you and I share the same mission, Debbie. If we can help more people get optimally healthy and really live their best life and avoid things like burnout, then the world will be a better place.
Awesome. I don't know how you do that all when you're working on less is more. Taking care of yourself, you're this ambitious, high performing individual yourself, and you coach part-time for our friend Ben Greenfield too. So you are a busy lady.
I am busy, but fortunately I have good team and systems to help me do it. So
Good. Well, thanks so much. We'll put all the links in the show notes so you guys can reach out and also listen to your great podcast. And we'll hopefully see you. Are you coming across to the US anytime in the future?
I want to, actually. I'm looking at it. Maybe in the summer. We're thinking about it. I was going to ask you if you were coming to the Health Optimization in London in May, because I'm speaking at that. But it sounds like you're not coming till September.
No, we can't get over there. I have Paleo FX I'm going to, and then there's Low Carb Cruises middle of May that Dr. Ken Berry's putting on. But half the speakers, you have to be, well, not everyone can make it on the cruise, but then KetoCon in July. So September, I should be in Europe, hopefully.
Well, let me know if you're here.
Yeah.
And I'd love to have you back on my show, Debbie.
All right. Anytime. It's fun to chat shop.
Yeah, it's really fun. Thanks for having me on.